weird kid at your school weird? Story 1. At my school, the weird kid was this guy who used to bring a pet lizard in his pocket every single day. Like, he wasn't sneaky about it either. He'd pull it out in the middle of class and just casually let it chill on his desk. He also talked to it like it was a person, and once told everyone the lizard gave him advice on life. Honestly, it was kinda iconic, but at the time, everyone just thought it was super weird. Story 2. He was obese with greasy hair and body odor. He was smart but weird. Years later, we got in touch through FB, and he told me how difficult things had been in school, growing up with no father and an intellectually ill mother. That's a lesson to learn. Sometimes the weird kid seems weird because they are doing their best to try and live in a bad situation. Story 3. Well, for one, he stockpiled an entire desk full of spoons from the lunch cafeteria over the course of several months, all clean. Then one day they all fell out. He was strange, but pretty harmless. Story 4. Adam. He was just weird. Like, kinda dumb and just weird. I remember at grade 8 graduation I met his dad. Thought, wow, I've never known a kid to look so exactly like his dad before. Then I met his mother and realized he looked exactly like her too. Story 5. Weird in a good way, really. He was simply too smart. In a high school with many smart kids, suburban high school in a wealthy area with 99% going to college and lots of kids going to Ivies and high academic publics, he still stood way, way above us. I looked him up not too long ago as we were talking. Whatever happened to, not a surprise, I guess, he is involved in deep space research, has a couple fellowships and writes papers about stuff that I can't even understand the titles. Story 6. So, I have a great story. We had a bit of a weird kid we called Storyteller. He was always making up stories that were really far-fetched, but he swore they were all true. This was in the 90s. For example, his dad was a German spy. He himself, at 14, was already working on some classified computer stuff that he couldn't talk about. Also, he was dating a German model, and so on. Well, a few years ago, I randomly moved in across the street from him. He's fully retired from a cushy IT job when he was like 45, and he's married to a smoking hot German woman. Story 7. I befriended the weird kid because I felt sorry for him being bullied. We spent so many hours together over the years, I still have no idea what makes him so super weird. Story 8. Kid smelled like he bathed in cat pee every day. Hissed at anyone who came near him. Used to run through the hallways from class to class. Threatened to terminate me in a computer lab because I used Internet Explorer instead of Firefox. Story 9. For the school-wide talent show, he put a plastic bag on the back of his head on which he had hastily scribbled something resembling a smiley face. He faced away from the audience and touched his hands behind his back. That was his talent, touching his hands behind his back. Story 10. Made a point to learn everyone's name. So even if they hadn't met each other or were total strangers, he could walk up to them and greet them by name. Which is harmless compared to him getting caught jacking off under his desk during math class. Story 11. There was this girl a few years older than me who thought she was a werewolf, among other things. As you can imagine, a lot of kids who made fun of her. She was a sweetheart once you got to know her, though. I'm not an expert, but I always wondered if she went through some super traumatic event when she was little that triggered some of her behaviors. Story 12. There was a kid in my school who was obsessed with Mario. He had Mario sweatshirts and notebooks and a Mario backpack. Well, someone figured out that if you told him Mario is dead, he'd flip. Scream and cry, fudge you know he's not every time. He got in trouble multiple times for attacking kids who said anything about Mario dying, even if they were talking about in the context of Smash Bros or something. This happened 8th, 10th, 8th grade, then I never saw him again. Story 13. When I was a freshman in high school, there was this kid I sat next to in math class. On several occasions, he brought handcuffs to class. He also had made a hit list of everyone in the school he despised. I don't recall being on the list, but I do remember being told by a friend that he said he would chop me into pieces and stuff me into his trunk. Story 14. He responded to everything with, "I know you are but what my eye," regardless of whatever was said. Eventually, people just stopped trying to talk to him. I remember seeing him sitting alone and asking if he wanted to sit with us. And he replied, "I know you are, but what am I?" I said, yeah, but do you want to come join us? I know you are, but what am I? I'm being serious. Come join us. I know you are, but what am I? Okay, never mind. I know you are, but what am I? Story 15. My undiagnosed autism. Second weirdest kid was my friend Chris. His family were born-again Christians who went around schools to preach the Bible. His brother was the star of the show, as an ex-user who saw Jesus one day, while off his face on sweets, and was saved. FYI, in England, we're not very religious, so this kind of thing is odd to us. Chris was just bizarre as a person. He always seemed to be trying to joke, but go too far to a point where it just wasn't funny. He'd pretend to see things and throw things at them. He'd annoy the hell out of most people. One day, I couldn't find him anywhere, and I noticed everyone staring at me in a really weird way. Someone sheepishly took me aside to tell me everyone was scared of me because of what Chris had done. Turned out he'd horrifically disfigured a Chinese exchange student by stabbing him in the face repeatedly with a butter knife from the canteen during first break. And those knives were blunt AF, so it must have taken a lot of force. Looking back, I'm pretty certain he was schizophrenic. Story 16. Autism plus growing up in a cult equals sign high. I had serious social issues. I'm well on my way to being old and still weird. Not in a cult, though. Left that behind decades ago. Can I talk to you for several hours about native plants, textile arts, cults, or one of my other special interests? Story 17. He loved Doctor Who so much that he dressed up and spoke like the Fourth Doctor. This was before anyone knew what Doctor Who was, and 80% of us were Mexican-American, including him. Story 18. He wore a cape and fake vampire teeth throughout the year. He's a Hollywood visual effects artist now. I'm happy for him. Story 19. One kid loved trains and drew them regularly. He was crazy talented with regard to the drawings. They were incredibly detailed, but it's all he ever talked about. Another kid loved being called Booger and dated the girl who pissed her pants in a couple of classes. They enjoyed public shows of affection. Story 20. Not really a feel-good misunderstood kid story, but here goes. A kid at my school who was just a mix of abrasive and socially awkward. It was really hard to talk to him because he would really easily misunderstand your intentions and then get super hostile really quick until you'd leave him alone. He quickly made enemies of pretty much every clique at school, even though most groups were pretty welcoming accepting from my experience. I saw how he acted towards most other kids, so I largely tried to avoid him, just 'cause I wasn't into drama. Groups of kids started to intentionally tease him about random stuff, just because they knew it was easy to get a reaction out of him. I would say it was kinda bullying, but he honestly didn't do himself any favors considering how many people I saw try and be his friend that he would berate and demean for random things until they didn't like him anymore. By high school, everyone had to do volunteer work, and he decided to do after-school care for elementary. Some students picked on him and called him a pedo, and he would obviously get really upset about it. I still never really talked to him much, but I did feel for him at the time because there is a real big stigma around men working with kids, and I thought it was commendable that he powered through it. Until a year after high school when he was convicted as a child predator. No one that I knew really made those accusations with any real basis beyond trying to get him upset. Everyone was horrified to learn that they were actually right on the money. To find out it was all happening at my old daycare made me absolutely sick. Story 21. Man, almost 40 years later, this still bothers me. His name was Stuart, and he was the school weirdo. Possibly on the spectrum, which wasn't really a thing back then, and for some reason, everyone picked on him. To be fair, I tried to reach out a couple of times, and he wasn't interested. Perhaps after a short lifetime of being picked on, made him wary of anyone appearing friendly. We came back from Christmas break to the news that on Christmas Eve, as his parents walked through the door, he put a shotgun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. I know there was more to the story, and that we were all just kids, but there were times I was poor to him and I still feel bad about. The whole thing low-key haunts me to this day. Story 22. We had a couple. One thought he was a vampire. Wore a cape, fangs, dressed in, the whole thing. Kept it up throughout high school. Don't know what happened to him. The other was a German exchange student who looked like a Hansen brother. He was just odd. I don't think it was that he was foreign, it's that he just had really dated clothes and generally acted awkward. Looking back, he was a nice kid, but it was likely autism. Story 23. This was in elementary school. She loved to draw wolves. She was so talented. I would sit with her at times and watch her draw during our breaks. Kids were not kind to her and made fun of her for it. Story 24. I was the weird one. Someone once referred to me as the cat girl with the socks. I wore cat ears and thigh-high socks to school almost every day. Story 25. There was a homely guy in middle school. The kids used to bully. Something happened to his neck, and for a while he walked around the hallways with his right ear close to his right shoulder. Between classes, all the kids en route to their next class would imitate him, heads leaning to the right side. So obnoxious, he was a nice kid. Story 26. He drew an M on his forehead and ran around the school, pretending to be Majin Buu from Dragon Ball Z, and was later caught trying to steal one of the school's chickens. Story 27. He used to sit beside me in class, and he had a lot of trouble socializing and fitting in, and then one year he came back to school and he was normal. No more, sleeping in class, and he started dating cheerleader. Story 28. He was generally quiet, but would make these weird comments about his old ma, ranging from concerning to mind-boggling. Can't remember specifics. This was all 10+ years ago, but the gist of it was she was a very strict, new age religious UFO conspiracist nut who'd covered their windows in aluminum foil and had a shrine in her house. Everyone felt kind of bad for him and assumed he was probably being abused. His younger brother joins the same high school in our final year, and word gets out their family is completely normal, and the dude just likes to lie. Story 29. We had a person who pissed himself while being in grade 6-7 on several occasions, at least once a month. He was the picture book oddball. Big teeth, glasses, always looked like he was focusing something up close, slightly drooling. Very short curly hair, lanky as hell, and usually taller than most teachers. I really felt bad for that guy because he was also mostly nonverbal from what I heard, and as you can guess, hadn't had many friends if any at all. Story 30. She was constantly drawing pictures of decapitated pigs, with the pigs' heads on stakes, accompanied by, I hate insert classmate's name he rate. Story 31. There were two of them. The first had impulse control issues, so he was frequently acting out and sent to the principal's office. He was eventually expelled for biting a teacher and student. The other was mostly just a band theater kid without an outlet. He was extremely extroverted and loved a spectacle. One of his shticks was to wear a cape and twirl down the hallway exclaiming, "Wonder Woman!" He would also spontaneously burst into song. Don't remember his full repertoire, but one of his go-to songs was Modern Major General. I always secretly liked his self-confidence and how unashamed he was about it all. But to my shame, I succumbed to peer pressure and harassed him with the rest of my peers. However, he never seemed to care or act bothered by it. Outwardly, he was always pretty jovial all the time. He eventually went on to join local politics and seems to have done relatively well. Story 32. My friend is so ADHD and everyone knew it. My friend once asked him, "Hey Mick, how often do you complacency?" He slammed his drink down and shouted at the top of his lungs in the cafeteria, "As fast as I can produce it." Story 33. One of them thought he was in a cartoon or an anime or something. He'd make exaggerated movements while dramatically reciting the name or catchphrase of said move. Story 34. In third grade, he would casually pee his pants. The teacher had a giant stack of his pants in her closet. She'd just give him a new pair and he'd change like nothing happened. Story 35. I was voted weirdest girl in my high school's yearbook. I didn't think too much of it at the time, but I've been having some problems in my adulthood, and I'm quite certain I grew up in domestic violence. I'm a 35-year-old woman and still scared of my dad. Story 36. Had a kid that cow his pants all the time and seemed to get pleasure out of it. Always asked people if they wanted to see his cow. Very weird, but I imagine there are tons of mental issues that could be involved. Story 37. He lit a school toilet on fire. 2. At the time, I couldn't understand how you light a toilet on fire, and TBH, I still can't. But he got suspended for it, so it def happened. Story 38. He was psychopathic. He'd intentionally destroy other kids' stuffed animals from home, their artwork, their books from home, anything they value. He'd intimidate the teachers. He'd hit, punch, beat up, and choke other kids randomly unprovoked. He'd hurt and torture any animals that came into the recess yard. It just felt very unsafe and scary to be around him. So, many teachers quit when on stress. He was wealthy and conventionally good-looking, but unpopular because he'd snap and hurt anyone. Story 39. He was obsessed with Laverne and Shirley. This was 1998, and we were about 8. He would always mention the show and say their names in air quotes. Now I would watch it on Nick at Night from time to time, but it's a little quirky for an 8-year-old to have that level of obsession with a then 20-year-old sitcom, I guess. Story 40. Wore a Mario hat, but the one with eyes in it from Mario Odyssey. And at lunch, he would throw the hat at girls to pauses them, and then got annoyed when people refused to act like they were under his control, or just didn't know he was talking about. Story 41. Guy that dressed up like G.I. Joe. He would drop and do push-ups in the hallway between classes, and carried around military magazines. He was not accepted into any branch of service. Story 42. She had a strangely determined dramatic streak. There were a lot of incidents. The one I recall most clearly. She decided she had a crush on our spindly 55-plus-year-old white-haired maths teacher, Mr. Greaves, and one lunchtime wrote "I, Mr. Greaves" in eyeliner across both her cheeks, and then just walked around like that for the rest of the day. She was quite pleasant and friendly, but she did weird dramatic cow sometimes. Could be wildly unpredictable. I'll say this for her, though. She truly didn't give a cow about people talking cow about her. She wasn't arrogant, just totally grounded and self-assured. Albeit about somewhat unhinged things. I heard she joined the police. Story 43. His sophomore year, he would run around as if he was from Naruto, the anime. Leaf Village headband on and everything, arms back, full-on sprinting headfirst. Then his junior year, he swore he was T.I. walking through the hallways singing, "Big things poppin', little things stoppin'." And no, he did not rap more lyrics. I'm certain those were the only lyrics he knew to the song. Story 44. He wore a lone glove and fedora like Michael Jackson and got super defensive aggressive when you asked him about the glove. My friend group theorized what could be under the glove until someone casually mentioned that they saw him washing his hands and there was absolutely nothing wrong with his hand. No deformity, no scars, no tattoos, nothing, not even a mole. He was a theater kid if that explains anything. Story 45. I was the weird kid at my Catholic elementary school for being interested in art. I'm still not really sure why they were to the sky up on that, especially considering my dad went to prison at the time. Story 46. He was profoundly autistic. He spoke to no one. He wore the same gray sweater every day. The sleeves were too long. He wore giant glasses that were not fit for his face. When he walked, he would put his offhand against the wall, meaning that if on the right side of the hall, he would drag his left against the wall. Always silent. I never tried to speak to him. I knew he didn't want to speak to me. My friend had known him since they were little. He could speak to him, just not in public. They were friends. My friend was a big boisterous guy like I am, but he got along with the kid. My friend would tell me what the kid was thinking. They had a kind of simpatico that I cannot describe. The kid was always around but never spoke. I liked him. No one ever messed with him. They never teased him. They never tormented him. He was allowed to just be himself. He was in his own world. That was okay. It was his business. My school was very accepting of who you were and what you did. Not because of policy, just because that was the community. Everyone is allowed to be themselves. I wish I still lived there. You're welcome to wear a hat on a hat with a skirt and carry a sword everywhere you go. No one will complain. You're just that guy and that's cool, and do you want sausage links or patties with your eggs? The coffee is already poured and Frank comes over to tell you about how the government is going to steal your pants to give them to aliens from the planet Klardos. I hope to retire in my hometown one day. In retrospect, I might be that weird kid. Hard to say. I just don't like oversized sweaters, so maybe I'm the other weird kid that always wears a Carhartt jacket. We're all weirdos, I suppose. Story 47. She'd run down the hallways screaming like a pterodactyl at random times. For no reason. 1 second, she'd be walking like a normal person, the next running and screaming. Would also kick doors open, sometimes would scream in class. She'd also sometimes say things that were borderline disturbing. Usually some dark history fact she knew offhand, or some strange random animal fact. We were friends, huh? Honestly, she was fine when she wasn't acting out. Since we all graduated, she went through a stage of saying she was non-binary and changed her name and everything, and now claims that she was brainwashed to believe that, and is now back to identifying as a woman, and is vehemently anti-trans, anti-vaccine, and doesn't believe in COVID. Spreads a whole lot of conspiracy theories, and thinks Trump has good points. We are no longer friends. I could handle pterodactyl screaming, but that was too far. Story 48. I was on his hit list, but I never talked to the kid in my life. He had several teachers mentioned first and then me. Once the administration talked to me about it, I was like, why me though? A lot more douches in high school than I was. Story 49. He dressed up in a Halloween costume zoot suit for a presentation on video games in speech class and handed out flyers full of typos about the history of FNAF with the URL to IGN's YouTube channel for further reading. Story 50. UK. A boy in my school tattooed a swastika on his forehead. He later went on to be a convicted and I think is still in prison. Story 51. He had a hit list with names of our classmates. It was discovered by our administration and then we never saw him again. This happened after Columbine. Story 52. One girl always argued with the teachers, but her argument or side was just illogical, irrational, and dumb, so it was hilarious and weird. Happened every day. Same girl would randomly pull out hair and start brushing it and cow. Another kid with special needs and smelled a little. Nobody liked him, but even though he smelled bad, he was really, really nice, and my group befriended him. Then he in class and had to be expelled. Another kid was super smart, but also arrogant and cocky as fudge, as well as oddly proportioned. Naturally, many kids did not like him. His head was so large and so was his butt. Odd-looking kid. Crazy that his backpack weighed at least 30 pounds. And another girl was labeled weird AF, but cool. She probably was autistic and overlooked. She had a Disney ordeal. Visited Disney twice a year, wore everything Disney, always did her hair with glitter and cow. Her makeup was bright and annoying. She was very smart, just seemed not very emotionally mature. She was weird, but most people liked her 'cause she stood out in a good way. Plus, even as a teen, you loved Disney cow. Story 53. In the days before we had a word for autism, there was a kid with an imaginary friend that was a light bulb. I mean, it was a real light bulb. Apparently, one day he plugged it back in his lamp and kissed it goodnight and horribly burned his lips and was permanently scarred. He's over 40 now and doing okay. He has a girlfriend that's also on the spectrum, and they make art. So, happy ending? Maybe? Story 54. He had Asperger's. We had no knowledge of Asperger's or even autism existing. If we had been taught about it, I like to think people would have been more patient. What I'm really disappointed about looking back is that when he was assigned as my science partner for something in 8th grade, my teacher gave me an apology and an extra credit point for being his partner. Instead of that, she could have IDK educated us about biology and the brain seeing as it was a biology class. Maybe she didn't know since I don't think there were specialized learning plans in 2004, just regular and special ed. But still, story 55. I moved around a lot and these people were drawn to me sometimes. Almost all of the time it was just they were autistic, queer mental health, or cow home life that came out in ways most people couldn't relate to. I was also one of them. Of all the weird kids that come to mind, very little of them deserve to be outcast, and we're dealing with bullying in some regard. Story 56. I'd say autism, but since we were 17 and younger people were scared of him doing stuff. Men never spoke to anybody, including teachers. He wasn't nonverbal, just angry AF. And yeah, that was unnerving. In high school after that, the girl with the cat ear sweaters that was maniacally in love with her bestie, the bestie who was, weird too, and her boyfriend who never left that creepy AF relationship. It gave me a lifelong hatred of cat ears and redheads. Story 57. Realistically, my school year, Jude, decided that Kevin was the weird kid. But in matter of fact, it turned out we were correct, as he was convicted of close relationship crimes as an adult. Story 58. In grade 6, the weird kid went out to the sand pits in the schoolyard that was meant for long jump during gym class, and he started digging in them like a dog would. People made up rumors that they saw him pee in the holes as well, but I don't think it's true. In grade 9, there was a different weird kid who we all called Slick Rick, because he would slick back his hair with gel. He had a collection of rocks that he said were dragon eggs. One time during lunch, my friends and I were sitting in the hallway having lunch, and he came up to us and said to sit still, because it was going to jump over our heads. We told him no, but he continued to harass us. It wasn't until we resorted to bullying that he would leave us alone. I'm not proud of that moment since he obviously was lonely and wanted to perhaps have lunch with us, but he made us all feel uncomfortable. There was another weird kid in middle school who was just quiet and sat alone a lot. I was nice to him, which resulted in him having a crush on me and asking me out. I declined and then he avoided me. The same thing happened to me in college. Pretty awkward. Story 59. He had a weird way of talking and came across as trying too hard, and had this air of pretentiousness to him. Later found out he was... Story 60. He would eat the tips of markers every day. He got arrested for trying to meet up with an underage girl a few years ago. Story 61. Parental violence. He never quite overcame it and took his own life around 40. It deeply saddened me. We were friends since kindergarten.